about existing market trends and what we should expect.
It's a challenging market for mobile operators at the moment. I think the revenue growth globally is very slow. This year we're expecting probably 2% growth in revenue for mobile operators, which is clearly not a good basis to be investing in 4G networks and pushing all this money into the business. Through 2020, it's going to be slow progress. We don't see any significant catalyst to suddenly create 10% revenue growth per annum. So it's a challenging market environment where operators are finding small additional sources of revenue, carrier billing, content strategies, sort of partnering with other players in the ecosystem, bringing the automotive industry into wireless. So all these opportunities, but they're layering small amounts of revenue, and at the same time, in many markets, we're seeing the average customer spend less on mobile services. So a lot of these new revenue opportunities are replacing declining end user spend rather than sort of creating huge additional value for operators.
Yes, just struggling environment. Yes.
It is a struggling environment. Yeah, it's the competitive dynamics in many markets mean, alongside this low revenue growth, we're seeing margins fall, so operators are getting squeezed. They're having to invest more to bring customers onto their networks, subsidizing more and more expensive smartphones. If they can't do that, selling data cheaper and cheaper to get users to use more services. So it is a very challenging environment.
So what carriers should do, how they could increase their ARPU, their money?
There's a few options, and we're seeing carriers in general look at maybe sort of 2 or 3 strategies. You either become a network play, so I'm going to build the biggest, cheapest, lowest cost network I can, and I'm going to win in the market by being able to sell data cheaper than my competitors. Or you become a platform play where you operate in a market, but you layer all this functionality into the network, so you can get a Google or a TV broadcaster to buy access to some of your assets to improve the service they offer to customers. Or you become a sort of a service and brand play. So it's about you start to think of mobile operators more like a Nike or a Gucci, where a Gucci handbag is maybe not better than a cheaper product, but they've managed to build this brand ethic, and we're seeing some operators start to become stronger sort of brand plays as I'm going to get people on my network because I'm an aspirational brand for these segments of customers. So we're seeing operators sort of focus on these different strategies to try and drive value, but it's still sort of slow progress there. But alongside that, I would say many operators are looking to 4G to drive value in the network, and we're seeing some good plays in a few markets where operators have been able to build a strong story about why you as an end user need 4G and why you need to buy a 5 gigabyte data plan instead of a 500 megabyte data plan because of all these advanced services you can consume.
So about my previous question, is there any existing visionary strategies through global operators?
I think, across those 3 strategies, network, platform or service, we see strong players in each. You look at markets like South Korea, where the operators have maybe been able to play across multiple strategies there. So they have these very segmented brand plays within one operator will have multiple brands going after the youth segment, after women, after the business segment, with very distinct propositions, and that's helped to drive value. And they've layered this huge wealth of content services alongside their sort of, I guess, their basic tariff plans. So I can watch baseball for free. I can watch TV, IPTV on my mobile phone, and it's I don't pay my operator, but if I do it too much, at some point I need a 10 gigabyte data plan to do it. So they're getting they're layering all this value in that's driving up the traffic on the network. So players like Korea Telecom and SKT are very strong there. You look at, I think, other interesting and successful players are SoftBank, who have this huge, we're not a mobile operator, we're an internet play, and they're buying up these players in different parts of the value chain, whether it is e-commerce or gaming, and they're becoming the mobile access is just a small part of what we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about European carriers group like Telefonica, Orange, T-Mobile?
I think that the challenge we see in Europe is, in Western Europe in particular, the margins are coming under so much pressure that many of these operators are maybe struggling to survive is a little bit unfair on them, but they're struggling to sort of realign their businesses and their costs to compete effectively. So players like Telefonica are doing interesting work in vertical segments and looking beyond traditional mobile access. How can we create value? Deutsche Telekom are doing a lot of quite impressive work more on the network side. So how do we become a more efficient network player? So there are some interesting plays there.
Okay, Phil, thank you. What about Russian carriers? Which on the stage?
I think when we look at a player like MTS, I think they have been very effective at that service and brand side. I think what I like about the Russian market is this level of segmentation you see the operators take on their tariffs and how they attack different segments. So if you come to the UK and try and buy a phone, then you get 4 tariffs to pick from, whether you're a business user who needs to roam or a 12-year-old kid who just wants to use WhatsApp. It's still the same brand selling the same set of sort of 3 or 4 tariff options, whereas the Russian operators, we see much more innovation on the pricing side. How do we get these different segments? If we can't get someone to pay $30 a month for a huge plan, how do we give them a week's internet access or a free internet access for 2 social networking sites? And that innovation on how do we get people on our network is a strong one. And I think with a prepaid strength in Russia, it's not about, you don't lock in your customers for 2 years. It's your relationship with your customer is always about the last experience they had with you. You can't rely on your customer staying with you for 2 years. So you have these strong sort of brand and customer loyalty initiatives there.
So that's a problem, because we have not subsidized smartphones that should be decrease their price, and so that.
I think I wouldn't recommend any operator who doesn't subsidize to aggressively get into the subsidy game now. I think the Russian market has a good structure there where users understand the value of the hardware they're buying, and they then pick the service that meets their specific needs. In a subsidy model, you end up forcing users to either get the device they want or the service they want, and they have to compromise on the other side of the equation. So the model you have in Russia is quite a promising one. In terms of how you get smartphones further into the market, I think we just need to follow the cost curve that those devices are taking. There's no quick fix, but certainly if you look at the market today globally, there's more sub $100 smartphones out there than there was 2 years ago, and that trend of low-cost smartphones is certainly growing fast, and something that will be a big feature of the Russian market.
How we could increase our just $10 ARPU in Russia? So just maybe predictions or something like that, future.
Selling more data is going to be a key part of the equation, and to a certain extent, more and more operators we talk to don't necessarily think in terms of how do we increase ARPU, or if they do, it's more how do we increase the value of a customer. You may have 3 or 4 devices on different accounts. It's about bringing these multiple connections into a plan. We're seeing a lot of operators in some markets create value by giving me a tariff where I have my smartphone plan, but for a few extra dollars I can add a tablet to my plan or a modem product, and it's about these small incremental. Don't think about those three devices and the small value they individually bring. It's about how do you get me as a customer to spend $15 instead of $12, and it's these small incremental steps there.
Okay, but I think it's questions more about economy or just not only about our spending.
Sorry?
About economy development. So we couldn't afford ourselves to pay more $20, $30 for cell.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, we're seeing the macro economy in Europe and globally as relatively flat. So you don't increase your end user spend by 50% because people don't have that money to spend on mobile. But it's about broadening what parts of the market mobile plays in. If I may only want to spend $10 on my mobile service for calling and texting, but maybe I buy instead of going to the cinema once a month, I buy a movie on Google Play or iTunes, and there's a role for the operator in taking a small share of that revenue. So it's about understanding how can you take other parts of the consumer wallet and bring them into the mobile domain. So and equally, it's about looking beyond the end user's wallet. Sort of who else in the market, as an operator, can I get revenue from? Is it will the automotive industry sort of support putting SIM cards into cars, and is there value? Will they pay a small amount there? So there are sort of multiple players in the value chain who can deliver revenue for mobile operators.
Okay, Phil, I forgot about infrastructure market. Could you describe trends and maybe 2014 or 2020?
Yeah, so if you go around the hall here and see what the infrastructure vendors are pushing, it's this, I guess, two main themes, or three main themes. It is about the next generation of the basic technology. It's about LTE Advanced and what comes after LTE Advanced. So how do we, with a certain amount of spectrum, how can we deliver more and more data to customers? We're seeing small cells be a very strong feature. So how do you build networks that are denser and denser, and you can deliver that same capacity into smaller areas, so increase usage that way at lower cost. And the third one is just this huge wave of intelligence we're seeing in the networks in terms of sort of software-defined networking and virtualization of a lot of those boxes that operators used to buy, and perhaps not in 2014, but a few years' time, and definitely by 2020, it's almost the mobile network today will look completely different then. It's not about separate boxes, it's about this more fluid and dynamic network where if I need extra resources for video optimization, then I light those resources up, and then as soon as I don't need them, I tear that down, and it's this very dynamic sort of allocation of resources and capacity to meet the specific needs of users. So more of the infrastructure industry becomes more of an IT type industry than a traditional sort of switches and routers and base stations.
Okay. What about voice in LTE?
It's starting to get going. We're seeing that the Korean market is quite well developed with voice over LTE services. We will see the US. The two big players in the US will have services this year, and a few other countries are starting to get going. I mean, if we were to speak this time next year, we wouldn't be talking about the 50 voice over LTE networks. We'd still be talking sort of 5 or 10 commercial deployments. But if you look out to 2020, voice will be delivered as voice over LTE across LTE networks. So it's more a case of when exactly does this happen, rather than is there an alternative way of delivering voice. So it's an important development for the industry. The challenge is voice works well on mobile phones today. and it's a huge revenue generator for operators. So why would you introduce a new technology for voice that isn't fully mature, and but most operators are waiting for someone else to have the painful lessons of VoLTE failing in a certain situation. So nobody wants to rush in and be the one to solve the problems that might come with VoLTE deployments. But it's definitely, it's here to stay, but it's probably here to stay from next year.
Okay.